Oh, lovely. Okay, thank you. And I wasn't going to say this, but every time it's welcome, 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 welcome. My guides are standing here by my side as well. And this evening, it's all about near-death experiences. And I've had a couple and I've had a few out-of-body experiences as well. And the reason for bringing this up was because I'm becoming so aware of so many people are, okay, I think they're saying this, I don't know why they're saying this way, feeling disconnected to the world around them, also wanting to know more about their loved ones who pass over onto the other side. Where is it that they go? What does it look like? Do you feel pain when you die? Okay, thank you. They just showed me an image. I was training some time ago as a soul midwife, and there was some information I learned through that course as well, which makes so much sense now. And I'm also doing a lot of trance work now, and working with light beings and other souls on the other side. So it makes sense for me to be talking about this because of through my experience, and I'll go through it. And of course, as always, I always answer questions as well. So if anyone has any questions after they've listened to this, do DM me and I will answer it as best as I can for you. So let's have a little look back. Okay. So, oh yes, and someone said to me, thank you, they just mentioned, and someone had mentioned a few times, there's a few YouTubes out there about my experience, and some people have mentioned, does it make you a better medium or does it make you psychic after having a near-death experience? We'll look at that later on, but that just came into my head as they just gave me this information. We will look at this as well. Okay, so let's have a look. Life before the first near-death experience, and why did it happen, for goodness sake? So if I take myself all the way back, I've got the date, I've written it down here. I always remember it was March the 11th, and I always sort of, you know, as time goes by, you sort of forget what it is. So it was March 11th, 2002, so some time ago now, because we're 2023. Okay. God, where does the time go? It's about 21 years ago now, and I remember that day very well. I have two children, and on that day when it happened, I have a 5 and a 7-year-old son and daughter, and as a busy mum, thinking I have to go to work as well as being a mum, running the house and everything else, I was very unhappy in my relationship, very unhappy with my life actually, and wondering if this is it. I wasn't happy. I'd had suicidal thoughts leading up to that, a few years before that, and I was really desperate in my relationship. It just wasn't working, and I didn't know what to do because I was a mum and I wanted to give them something totally different from what I'd had. My own mother had been married and divorced 3 times, and I just wanted to give them a different way of being brought up. So there was a big pressure on me. And was I psychic at that time? There was always a few things I felt, but I never saw myself as a psychic medium. I just thought my intuition was really good, but I didn't know much. And at that time, I didn't find out until afterwards that on my dad's side of the family, because my dad has split up with my mother, that he was a psychic medium. And also his mother was a psychic medium, and she used to go to spiritualist churches. So I didn't know that. It was only happened even 10 years ago that I discovered that. And then later on, I also found out that on my mother's side, that her father was psychic, and his sister, my great aunt, she was also a psychic medium. And it's quite unusual to have 2 sides of the families where you have psychic mediums in. But I didn't know this at this time. All I know that I was very sensitive. I had lots of people saying, oh, she's very sensitive, family members. And I took that as being like an insult or something. I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. And I didn't know anything about empathy, intuition, nothing at all, to be honest. So the story begins that day, that morning, like any mother who's trying to take their children to school to drop them off before they go to work. You're always rushing around. You have 2 children, 5 and 7, 2 dogs and a cat and a rabbit and a guinea pig. And you had them all running around the house, screaming at each other. I was screaming at them. I remember I'd had to wear a suit. I had a blouse on, and I had to look quite smart, had to do the hair, the makeup. And as a typical mother, there was always food that was down one part of my clothing, either down my skirt or my jacket or my blouse or whatever it was. And I remember, and I just felt so flustered. Now, to take them to school, it was primary school. So they're 5 and 7 years old, and I had to take them in the car. And I remember the journey all the way there, and I was frantic to get them there on time. But my mind was elsewhere. Like what we do as humans, our mind tends to be elsewhere. I was thinking about my work while I was driving them to school. I wasn't being very mindful, almost as if I lost part of that morning to the thought of thinking I had to get to work, I had to sort stuff out. got them to the school gates, parked the car up, being a bit cheeky, left the car in the school car park. But as I said goodbye to them, I was in such a rush because all I could be thinking about was I had to get to work to pay the bills. That 9-to-5 job, which really wasn't a 9-to-5, was a part-time job. So I remember quickly kissed them on their foreheads, saying, go on, quick, shoo, go, go, go. If I knew that was going to be that last morning of seeing them and actually holding them for a very long time, I would have taken my time, of course. Oh, I always feel tearful when I think about it. I feel guilt as a mother. And so I remember I kissed them on their foreheads and pushing them away. Go on, go, go, go. See you later. And I remembered I just ran to the tube station. It was like an 8-minute running to the tube station, got on the train. And again, didn't think about the children. I was just thinking about work. That's all I was thinking about. And I look back and I think, my God, what a terrible mother I am. But I'm sure lots of people who can hear this, the parenting, this is very similar to yourselves. So I got to work. I loved my job. I was very fortunate. I worked on a project for the elderly, and it was about reconnecting elderly to people, that volunteers who would come and befriend them. So the project was set up in Islington in London, and it was based out of a community centre. And the elderly that were there, their family members had to move out of the area because the area was becoming so gentrified, very expensive to live in. So we had 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, 70-year-olds that had nobody there that would read their newspapers for them or their letters or help them with their bills. And they were lonely. And part of my job was to go in. I'd already started training as a counsellor, but part of my job was to go to visit these individual people in their, whether they're in apartments, blocks of flats or their houses, to look at how we could help them as a project. I would liaise with social services, and some of the cases were really upsetting, how some had been abused. So for me, I was like, yeah, I'm doing this job. I love this job. I'm helping to raise funds for this charity. I was expanding it. I was going out to schools. I was helping the older generation to go into schools to build projects. I remember there was one day there was an RAF gentleman, he was in his 80s or something like that, and he gave a talk on him being a pilot. And when he started talking about how he felt about flying the planes, you could see this 80-year-old had turned to this 19-year-old man again, and the audience, the sixth formers of the school, were listening, and they were really they were there with him during the war and him flying the Spitfires and everything. And then I said, all we needed was a volunteer, this gentleman. He can't see anymore and he wants someone to read for him. The hands went up and there was lots of teenage boys that wanted to help out. And we had lots of volunteers from the school at that point. As long as they came along with an adult, it was fine. So I worked on that project and I expanded it. Now that day, that very same day, there was a client that I had to, it was writing a letter, believe it or not, to social services, not just an email, but just to make sure that this client received the help they needed. And I remember that day very well. I was on the computer, which isn't my forte. I'm not very good with all the technical stuff, but I remember everything that I had to do that day. And I remember thinking, I have to hurry up, I have to leave because I have to post this letter. And it was around about 2:10 in the afternoon. And as I come out of my office is based in a community centre. So you often hear the piano played by somebody, whoever it was, a volunteer or one of the older people. And then you had them playing bingo in the background. And what I loved about it is that, because my grandparents had passed over by that time, what I loved about it was every time I came out of my office, there was a, bye, Anne, have a nice day. And I remember when the children were that young as well, that if they were unwell and they couldn't go to school or had no one to babysit them, I'd take them into work. And the old people absolutely loved them. In the end, my daughter kept on playing rookie and sort of saying she was sick just so that she can go along to the bingo or 1 o'clock club or hearing the piano playing. And yeah, so it was lovely. So it felt like an extension of a family, to be honest, because I was living in a part of London, North London, that was very far away from my family in South London. So it was lovely to have that connection. So that morning, well, as it went by, and I was thinking, I have to post this letter. It got to about 2:10, and I remember, no, I need to hurry up. Again, the brain was so focused on what I thought I had to do. So I left the office. I had my letter in my hand, said goodbye, rushed out, didn't really say a long goodbye as I normally would do, but quickly rushed out, bye, thinking I'm going to see him the next day. Went out the community centre, walked to the end of the road. And as I got to the end of the road, I was thinking, if somebody presses the traffic light button, I'll stop and cross the road. I'll go get my newspaper, it's a routine that I used to do, read my newspaper on the train. I was thinking this in my head. And if they don't press the button, I'm going to carry on going right, walking to the train station. So it's all going over my head. I now know differently that every thought that you have sends out like a frequency and energy wave. So the universe is listening, and depending on how much of an emphasis that you put on that feeling and thought, that the universe works with it. I'll explain as we go along. So what happened was, that was the day that I fully awokened, as they say. Somebody had pressed the button. There was about 4 or 5 of us at the traffic lights. I'm like, okay, fine, that's made my mind up. Right, I'm going to cross the road. So I crossed the first part of the road, got to the traffic island in the middle of the road, and there was people all around me. And in my head, it was like, again, I was still in my head. I was like, okay, shall I go straight across to post the letter through the letterbox? And or shall I go at an angle to my right, cross over that way, and then I can go and get my newspaper and then go back on myself? My mind was all over the place. And then I heard this voice. So I was awake at the time. I was conscious. And I heard this voice. Everything's going to be okay, I heard. And then I heard it again. And I was like, hang on, that sounds like my nan's voice. And it stopped me in my track. And it's before I got hit by the car and I heard her voice. And I had been hearing guides before that time, nothing at all. So I was like, this is really strange. And I'm still thinking. Now, I didn't know at the time, because I was just in that process, that there were people that were crossing the road. So I was still on the traffic island, and it was like tiny milliseconds. I put my right foot down because she said, go and get the newspaper. As I went to go and get the newspaper, it turned my body to the right, which meant that when the van actually hit me, my neck was not severed, my head didn't come off, I didn't go through the windscreen. But what it meant was, when I turned to my right, my body weight was all on my right side of my body, all that weight, and the van hit me on my left-hand side of my body. When it hit me, I bounced across the ground. It was about 30 or 40 foot, and I landed on the ground, so on the road. No one else got injured at all. No one got hit by this van at all. It was a green light to say that it was okay for pedestrians to cross. I didn't feel the van hitting me at all. I just felt a warm sensation, and I kept on hearing the voice. And I'm sure at that time I felt, this is my nan, why is she here? So I was on the ground, physically on the ground on my right-hand side, and that was it. And then later on, I found that everybody was rushing around, and I was, calling the ambulance and everything. All I felt was this warm sensation, this warmth. I felt this bright white light around me. It wasn't obscuring my eyesight. It was very comfortable. I felt very safe and supported. It almost felt as if I was being cradled and hugged by a white duvet around me. I felt so safe. And I just remember hearing my nan's voice. It felt very warm and very calm. Now, there was part of me that had the outer body experience when I was looking down at my body. Didn't know it was my body at the time, but I was looking down at some human that was laying on the floor. And I remember thinking, oh, who is that? Is she going to be okay? Didn't know it was me, didn't register at all. I remember looking at everybody that was standing around. There must have been a crowd of about 20, 30, 40 people, spectators looking at, seeing what was going on. Some were in shock. A lady, I'll never forget it, I could hear her, but not hear her from my body that was laying on the ground, because I was out of that. I could hear her saying, oh, I'm going to get her a towel, put under her neck, raise her head up. And everyone was screaming, saying, no, don't touch her. Don't touch her. You might damage her back. You might, something might happen with her neck. And I could hear it. Everyone was shouting. Such a kerfuffle that was going on. And then I remember I looked around and I could see people's faces, and they looked so shocked. So I was there on the ground. So I was looking from where I was down at the people in the crowd, looking at their faces. And I could sense and feel how they were feeling. They were in shock. It was a high adrenaline. I could feel it running through their bodies. I looked at someone in particular and I recognized him. He was Uncle Peter, so my ex-partner's uncle. And I thought, why does he look so sad? Why is he in so much shock? And he was trembling. Then another part of me felt like it went whoosh, and I ended up sitting in this lorry driver's cabin, and I could hear him swearing. So, this silly woman, she's got knocked down. Fancy her doing it. I've got to get home. I want to do this. And the road now is being blocked off. There's going to be an air ambulance. It was on the radio, Capital Radio, that was playing out. I could hear it in his cabin. And he was talking to his boss, and he was like, oh, she's got knocked down and fancy her doing this. Now the road's, blocked off. And I was like, who is he talking about? So I was actually in the cabin. And then whoosh again, I was off. And then what I saw where I was very white area. And I felt at peace. I felt that I belonged there. Now, for memory reference, okay, I'm going to say that now because work I've been doing recently through trance, I'm starting to understand in a different way. I felt that I was in a large library, a large circular library, and I felt there were books and scrolls that were being pulled out of the shelves. And I remember just being there and feeling that I felt safe and secure and supported. I felt very warm. When I looked around, I could see some figures and some beings. I have to call them beings because I had no description for them as such. I remember I saw some individuals wearing cloaks. I remember looking down and seeing they haven't got any feet. How comes they're just like moving around? That's what I was thinking. And I was just like looking at them, but I felt very safe and I didn't know what was going on, but I just felt it's okay. I also felt that there was a presence, a large presence next to me that was showing me like a book that opened up. It was a bit like a Harry Potter book where there were images coming out of this book. And I remember looking at it and I could see it. And it looked like it was the book of my life. It was showing me of all my lifetimes before this one. It was giving me, downloading some information. I remember someone pulled out a scroll out of this tube, and as they unrolled it on this large table in front of me, that it was like a waxy material, and it was like bluish, and it was like when you build a house, like the architect or something. And again, I was being told it was the architecture of my life and the map and where I needed to go off to. I was given all this information, and I remember thinking, how am I going to remember all this? But I remember feeling it as well in my pores, and I remember that I need to take in as much information as I can. I remember just being there, and I felt very, very safe. The next minute, there was a whoosh back, and I was like looking down again at this body, and I didn't again know it was me. And as I'm laying there, I didn't know it was me, but as I was laying there, I could see from the image, this out-body experience, I could feel and see that somebody else was running down the road. It was my ex-partner running down the road. And I was wondering, why was Philip running down the road? And I saw his mother. And as they're running down the road, they then step into the road where I'm laying. And I remember him placing his hand on my head. Now, I didn't physically feel his hand on my head, but I saw his hand being rested on my head. But what happened was that I could feel it into his thoughts. And what he was thinking is, how am I going to cope and manage with Rebecca and Nathan? And I remember at the time feeling hurt because instead of thinking, oh, Anne, she's dead, it was like, how am I going to manage? And at the time I was really upset, and I remember, but I was elsewhere, but not in the physical body. Then where I was, because of the connection that he had made to me, and he said my name, then I asked, what will happen to Rebecca and Nathan? But before I got to the sentence, it was like literally, what will? And straight away they heard my guides. I didn't know they were my guides at the time, but my guides came quickly back, gave me the information straight away and said, they will be okay. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right. And it was the pull of me missing Rebecca and Nathan that I feel to this day actually brought me back, because I wanted to be their mum. I wanted to kiss them. I wanted to be with them. So that time I could see that, but I was still elsewhere. I saw the paramedic arrive on his bike, and I could see that where he'd parked up, and he came running and he had this device in his hand. I later found out that it was like these electric paddle things that bring you back to resuscitate my heart, to the defibrillator. It was that to do my heart. I remember he came over and I still wasn't in my body. I was looking down at my body. He came over and pushed everyone out of the way. The ambulance turned up. I could hear the sirens. They started cutting my clothes. There was no shame or embarrassment then, because I was somewhere else. There was later on when I was in accident emergency and the resuscitation bed and crash team came in. But at that particular point, there was no shame. It was just cutting off my clothes. And I remember someone was bending over saying to me, oh, this looks very expensive, this coat. Sorry, dear, we've got to cut it off. I could hear them, but it wasn't from my physical body, but I could hear them and I could see them. They started cutting off my clothes. And again, I didn't feel anything. And then they put the paddles on my chest. And when they did this, it was a thump. And just like in a water chute, as you come down like a water slide in a theme park, I came rushing back, and I felt I was spinning and I was woozing all the way around, and I rushed back into my body. When I rushed back into my body, there was so much pain. I was shaking, I was trembling, I gasped for breath. And they said, well, she's back. And then I felt the pain, and they gave me the gas and air. They moved me into the ambulance. And as we were traveling along in Islington, I think we got to about King's Cross or somewhere around there, I then came out of my body again, and I looked at the top of the ambulance, and I could see the numbers on the top of the ambulance. I was looking down at the ambulance. My body had popped out again. My soul had left my physical form because it was looking down at it and looking to see what was going on. I could see all the cars, and I could hear the sirens. I couldn't hear the sirens from the human ears. It was literally where I was. They got me into the hospital, they rushed me in, and I could feel the trolley now underneath me, and I was back into my body again. They later said they had to resuscitate me a number of times. They defibrillated my heart a few times, and that must have been when they defibrillated my heart that I came back into my body again. In crash, I had 3 sets of teams, one working on the lower body part, my legs, my pelvis, and then one team on my trunk of my body, and another team on the top part. And I remember them cutting off all my clothes. I remember I came out of my body again, and I was looking around at the hospital team, and I remember that all the medics were quite anxious. They was rushing around and putting tubes into my body and needles, and I couldn't feel a single thing. And I just remember watching them, and I could feel the tension. I felt quite sorry for them because they thought they were going to lose me, and I was out of my body. They cut every item of clothing off my body. And I suppose looking back at it, I think the human Anne would have been embarrassed, but where I was, the physical form didn't make any difference. Every time I popped backwards and forwards, I was told the Hall of Souls, the records, the Akashic records. I only found that was the wording later on. That's not what I would have called it back then. It just felt like the Hall of Souls. That's what I remember feeling. From that, when they paddled my heart again 4 or 5 times, they said in total, I then went up to a ward and stayed in intensive care for some time. When I came round, there was a nurse that sat next to me, and she said, you kept on calling out your nan. It was Gwen. And I said, yeah, that's her name. And I said, I felt that she was sitting by my side. My nan had passed over when I was 15. She was like a surrogate mother to me. Because of my childhood, I often stayed with her. And I just said, I felt that she was by my side all the time. She was my angel that held my hand and helped me to come back. Sorry, I can still feel it today. It feels so as if I'm there. I'll never forget it. And then from that moment on, it started making me look at life very differently. I returned home. I couldn't walk. My pelvis was broken. My right hand side had whacked with force the ground. The car was traveling 40 miles per hour. So you have to 3 times that, the speed that happened in the body. All the organs had been shaken up. I had blood in my urine. My spleen had been damaged, my kidneys, my gallbladder, which was later taken out because it was ruptured. My knee had been broken, the cartilage had been damaged, 7 breaks in my foot, ongoing operations. At one point, there was no supply to the foot, and they thought they were going to have to amputate it. It took me 4 years to walk without a stick. 2 years I was in a wheelchair. I had to use a commode for ages. And I was on crutches forever. My ribs had been fractured on both sides. I remember this impact on my body, it was still shaking. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress afterwards because every time I went to fall into sleep, my body would shake and have a vision of the car or the van hitting me again and again. I lived with that for about 2 years, had to go into therapy. My poor dog, every time I walked on the lead and every time I crossed the road, I was so scared. And in the end, she became scared of crossing the road. So I had to do some work on her. So I laugh. But I remember laying there, I had to lay on the sofa for such a long time, for about a year downstairs, as I couldn't go upstairs. And I remember I had 2 dogs, and I remember the whippet that she just gently jumped onto the sofa with me just to be by my side and gently crawled all the way up the sofa, gently. And every time I cried and yelped because my whole body was covered in bruises, she was just so nervous. But it's almost as if that she was an angel in disguise and helped me to heal, to be honest. So she laid with me all that time. I also had severed my stomach muscle. So my trunk of my body, it was like a large watermelon on the side where it was just sitting there like flesh hanging. Took a long time. And I remember, and yeah, it does feel very tearful, that usually every night I used to say goodnight to the children and read them their books. And of course, I couldn't do that for at least 6 months. I couldn't read my children a book. I couldn't tuck them into bed. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time before that accident. And then during that time, it was painful. I then ended up shuffling upstairs on my bottom just to get to the top of the stairs, and they had to sit on the landing with me because my son had, well, both of them had a bunk bed, and there was no way I'm going to climb up there with, I had an air boot on in the end. I was constantly going through operations. My foot had nearly been amputated and turned off my ankle. So yeah, it was ongoing. But we got through it. The children helped me. They pushed the wheelchair. We got through it each time. And I remember Rebecca, she was 7 at the time, and someone came over to us in the park and they started shouting and saying, "Is your mother okay?" And then Rebecca's 7, she turned and she said, "She's not deaf. She can hear you. She just can't walk." I just thought that's so Rebecca. So it took a long time to recover from that. And I remember as during the recovery, I kept on having flashbacks with post-traumatic stress, but also kept on feeling I had visitations from angels that were keeping an eye on me, white light around me constantly. And I kept on hearing my nan's voice, kept on feeling that she was holding my hand. Now, as we move along, I recovered from that. You might think that's it. But again, was I listening? Well, I remember I went back to the church where I was at before the accident, and I remember speaking to the vicar, and I remember saying to him very clearly that I had this experience that I went elsewhere. And he said to me, "We don't believe in that here." And I was like, "What?" I was with angels. I saw this light. I had this feeling that I was being shown information, and you don't believe in that? And he said, "No." And I was like, "Where do I turn to now?" Because I had followed the faith, and I'd been brought up with many different religions from different types of cultures that I've been brought up into, and I just didn't know where to go. And that's when I sought out more information, and I went to College of Psychic Studies to learn information. And at no point did I think of becoming a psychic medium or wanted to do that job at all. I was quite happy with the job that I had. So life went on, and then I really learned that that was an awakening. That was the full stop to make me stop and think how I was living my life. I knew I had to get out of that relationship, but I still didn't do anything. I was stuck. I was a mother with 2 children and thought I wanted the best for my children. So I continued on that avenue, going down that pathway, taking the children to school, still continuing to work, still to be in that relationship I wasn't happy in. And then we moved, we changed houses. And then the next experience happened. So my lungs collapsed. So I've got the date here, 2010, January 2010. I was later diagnosed with a lung condition that really I should be disabled and have oxygen by my side, which I did for some time. I had this condition where a lot of my lungs were scarred. They still are today, but I still get by and I still carry on. It doesn't stop me. But I remember that day very well. I'd had a chest infection. I couldn't breathe. I was on a nebulizer. I just was in so much pain. Every time I breathed in, I felt there was a belt strapped around my rib cage and it was pulling in each time. I had asthma on top of having scarring on my lungs. And I remember I just couldn't breathe and I gasped my breath. My daughter was downstairs and I couldn't even call out to her. And I remember at the time, I didn't believe in anything like angels in the sense of you actually got to see an angel or what an angel actually looked like. Saying that sounds a bit strange considering the first experience. You'd think I'd sort of wise up to it now, but I'm like, yeah, no, maybe it's not real. I heard a noise, I heard a thump, and by the side of me, I was too scared to turn to my right-hand side where the thump had come from, the sound. So I tried looking at the side of my eye. I remember I couldn't breathe either at the time and I was really scared. And I remember reaching out before this thump happened and then said, "God, somebody just help me, please." Now, I didn't know actually it was going to work. I didn't know what was going to happen. It was just a plead as in, "God, help me," as you do, sort of flippantly. What happened was this thump, and then to the side of me, I could see this image. That's all I could say. It was an image at first. And it felt to me, the image was being given to me in my mind, that it was like a 30 or 40 foot tall image of an angel. And I was like, what does an angel even look like? The angel appeared to me as a statue, and all I heard, that I am here, how can I serve you? I later found out it was Archangel Michael that came to my side at that time, and I found it really hard to believe. I sat with it for so many months afterwards, and I thought I must have imagined it. Lack of oxygen to the brain, you know, all those sorts of things. But I remember that this strength, there was a sword there, there was a shield there, and he was by my side. And I remember he was kneeling and he had one hand on his forehead and he said, how may I assist you? How can I serve you? And I said, I can't breathe. Rebecca heard the sound from downstairs and she said, Mum, it felt like the ceiling had collapsed. And I said, yes. And I wondered if she had seen the angel by my side, but she couldn't see it. She called the ambulance. The ambulance came. I was totally out of it. My heart had stopped again. My lungs weren't working. I was rushed into hospital. That was that situation. That was that near-death experience at that particular time. My lungs, my heart stopped for a few minutes. And that was what I got from that. The third time, you think I'd learn, wouldn't you? I was like, no, I don't know if I really believe in angels. I don't know what I'm seeing. And then the third time happened. I was due to have a operation done. I went into hospital. The date was, yes, I remember now because they just said to me, I went in on the 19th of July, 2018, into this private hospital to have an operation done. I went in and they said to me that something with the instruments, it was waiting there for hours, and there was something with an instrument they had to place inside my body, and they said they hadn't got it. And I was really upset and really disappointed. And I was quite annoyed actually, because I'd taken the day off work. And then they rebooked me in for the next day, which was the Saturday. Now, I recently spoke to somebody who is a well-known astrologer. Now, it seems to be a reason why I had that date delayed. When she looks at all the dates where I had my near-death experiences, the planets were in similar spaces, and she said this is unusual, it's unheard of. So she could see where the planets were and how they're lined up. There's a podcast to be done about that later on, and where they were lined up, it showed it was important. So it was significant that actually the next day I had the operation, and not on the 19th, it was on the 20th. So on the 20th, I went down to the operating theatre. I remember holding my pillow and I went down. I was a bit nervous, but I was like, yeah, no, let's get this done. Let's get this operation, needs to be done. I remember that, you know, the anaesthetist talking to me, and I said, yeah, I've had operations before. I'm absolutely fine, no problem at all. I went under the operation. They had done the operation, and while they were doing the operation, it was a blue theatre, and I remember the nurses, and I remember, yeah, it was all women, and the anaesthetist was a woman as well. It was a blue room. And then next minute I know that I was in a white room, a white light. There was this white man with this very funny haircut. He had a fringe going across here like this, tiny rimmed spectacles, and he looked like he was like a dentist or something. So he had a white top on with buttons, and there was like a collar that was open. It was really strange. And I remember I felt as if I was 5 years old being told off by the headmaster or something. And he turned around and was pointing to me, you've got to go back. It's not time. And he turned around and he said, I know, I'm telling her, she's got to go back. And he said, you can't keep doing this. We keep putting you back in, and you keep popping out, go back into your body. And I remember feeling, oh my God, I've done something wrong. And I felt really bad. So it was a white room again, a very white room. And my eyes, like now I've got the sun in my eyes and I'm squinting, but in this white room, there was no squinting of eyes. It's very bright, very warm, very safe, very comfortable. I felt I was in a really safe spot. I didn't want to go back, to be honest. I was like, okay, I'm fine. I love it here. And that was like very much like the first time when I popped out of my body, my soul left my body for a while. And in a way, when I popped back, the human experience felt so painful. I wanted to stay where I was on the other side. And I remember feeling very guilty about that because I had two young children. And as a mother, I should be wanting to go back to the children. But there was a real big pull of like connecting to the other side. So what happened then? 6 minutes, my heart had stopped, they said. The anaesthetist came running over and I looked up, my eyes opened, and all I heard of these bells. It was the bells that were waking me up, sort of thing. It was the bells saying the heart had stopped and they were trying to resuscitate me. And then I remember this nurse, so beautiful, she was so lovely. And I started talking to her, and she was from Nigeria originally, and she held my hand. She goes, oh, you gave us all such a fright. She's back, she's back. And I remember the nurses coming over to me saying, "Oh, are you okay?" And the anaesthetist, she was shaken. She was like, "Oh," she goes, "We lost you for a few moments. Oh, you're back." And I then delivered this lovely nurse, this Nigerian nurse, a message straight away about her teenage son. And I was like, "Oh, what am I doing?" Because, I had a few skills set, but I didn't know I could deliver the messages. And I literally said to her about a teenage son. And she said, "How do you know about him?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just giving you this message." She said, "Oh, you've been somewhere else, haven't you?" And I said, "Yeah." So it's not the first time she'd witnessed this. And then I started sitting there with all that information I'd received about the near-death experiences, the out-of-body experiences, trying to add it all up and trying to make a connection. And now as a medium, when I work, that experience, what made it different now as a medium is that I go there to that place. I go to that, whether you want to call it Akashic Records or Hall of Souls or wherever it is, I go to that energy stream. I tune in, I plug in, I connect with all the souls that are there, the information that's stored there, and I pass on the information. They show me, they tell me what's to happen, or your soul journey of where you've been. And I often wondered, why me? Why give me this? Now I say opportunity, but why this happened to me? I was so confused. And I remember being there at the first near-death experience and being given all this information that I was here to serve. And that's what they were telling me. When I returned to my body, it was like amnesia. I sort of couldn't remember the information. Now the connection I have with my guides, and when I ask them about why do I not remember so much of the information, they tell me because the brain has to have reference to helping you pass over. So my brain needed to feel comfortable, my mind needed to feel comfortable, the human part of my soul needed to feel comfortable at passing on to the other side. So it needed the reference of the library. It needed that to show me. It doesn't mean it's like that in the Akashic Records, but for me, that's what I needed at that particular time. I needed to feel it was a library because I felt safe. I needed to hear my Nan's voice so that I would pass over gently, and that I knew that she was there to reassure me. I know as a medium, when I get images of loved ones who've passed over, when I get images, like yesterday, I had a client that came to me and he was a non-believer, and I said, "Your brother sat up in bed, your brother left, he has a hospital gown, he saw the doorway open into the other side, he saw a family member stepping forward to put out their hand to him, there was a dog there as well, and he walked forward, he stepped forward and left." And he looked at me and he said he couldn't have. And I said, "You don't believe it, because your brother was in a wheelchair in his lifetime. He had a car accident, he had a brain injury, couldn't walk, couldn't talk. That's why you don't believe me." And he said, "How did you know that information?" I said, "Because I have him here." So as I work as a medium, I can take my energy there. I can connect to them and feel that energy and allow them to communicate through me. So that's how it's helped me in my lifetime. Have I had any other experiences? Yes. Have I had other things that's gone wrong? Yes. About 30 operations, even the appendix bursting on the operating theatre. Did I have an out-of-body experience? No. Last January 2022, what happened? I had a brain bleed. I had a seizure. Did I have an out-of-body experience? No, nothing. It was those 3 major times that I had those experiences. Now it's just, I know I need to stay here to move on and to get on with my mission as helping other individuals. Now I'm doing trance. When I go into trance and I work with light beings, when I connected to the energy the other day, I sat here and I wept, because I went into that energy field of where I was for the first near-death experience, and I realized and heard the message: we are all as one. Our human brain needs to have definitions and resources, and to think what we think an angel might look like, or a loved one, or the situation. And when loved ones pass over, they give me images for comfort of my clients who are sitting in front of me. For them, they might say they're walking in the field, they're with the trees. Doesn't mean it necessarily is there. It's just, it's helping the loved ones on this side to help them to feel comfortable, to know that they are safe. Their energy joins as one. And that's my experiences. So I hope that this helps you to understand. For those who are here live with me now, in a moment I will stop the recording, and then they can ask me questions if they do wish so. and the questions will later on be put up underneath this video. For those who are hearing this on record, you are able to ask me questions. Just directly email me, send a message to the website, or see me on Instagram at Odyssey, the platform. I will get your message and I'll be able to answer your question. So if anyone has any question in a moment, I'm just going to stop the recording.